Hey everyone, welcome to the Swift Arcade. I'm your host, Jonathan Rasmussen. Thank you so much for coming back. We're going to continue our journey of taking this view that we just created and integrating it into our Starbucks app. And the way we're going to do that is using a pattern that's really popular in iOS, something called the protocol delegate. So if you'd like to see how to take an existing view, add a button, and then add the functionality so that it actually presents and reacts to a view doing an action in an app, come on in and we'll show you how to hook up a protocol delegate pattern for our Starbucks app. Okay, so what we have here is a classic problem in iOS. How does a subview communicate back to its parent view controller that something interesting has happened? In our case here, we have a button that we'd like to add that is going to communicate back from this subview up to the parent view that something has happened. Someone's clicked and we'd like to now present this new view controller. So the protocol delegate pattern is a way that enables us to do that. Basically, we'll add a button, and on that button in that subview, we'll apply the pattern, and that's going to communicate back up to our view controller that someone's pressed the button and you're free to react to it. And the mechanics behind it basically look like this. In our home header view, the first thing we're going to do is define a protocol. In this case, we're going to call it the home header view delegate. That's the protocol that our home controller is going to implement. And in there, we define the action that we're going to send the message to back to our parent. In this case, did tap history button. That home view controller is then going to register themselves as the delegate for that action as a weak var in our home header view. The reason why this is a weak var and it's optional is because we want to avoid retain cycles. We don't want each of these guys having a strong connection to one another. So we make the delegate here weak, so if one disappears, they won't be referencing each other. Then when the actual event happens in the header view, like someone does tap that history button, if a delegate is set, and it will be because the home view controller has registered itself, we'll call did tap history button on that, and that will send a message back to the home view controller, and they are then free to do whatever they want. In this case, present the new home view controller that we're going to incorporate in. So let's jump into the code now and see what this looks like in action. Okay, the first thing I've done is I've copied in all the files from our previous spikes of working with the history view into our old Starbucks view project. So I've just saved you watching me copy files in. But basically, this is what our directory structure looks like now. We've got a history tile with all that great history work we did in the previous 3 episodes. I've moved the star rewards into the rewards tile. I've also renamed the rewards directory here rewards tile. And just if you've been following along from the beginning, this is kind of an overview of just what the directory structure looks like. I've just copied in the files, everything compiles, and now we're ready to go and start. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to add that history button here right beside our inbox button at the very top. So let's begin there. This is our home header view. So let's go find our home header view, which in my case is right here. And at the very top, let's just start by defining a button, just like our index button here. That's going to sit right beside it right there. We can then add that button to our view here by following the same pattern we had before. Here we had a make inbox button. I'm just going to create another function called make history button. And on that button, I'm going to go ahead and add the target action with the selector history button tapped so that when someone taps this, they are going to call this action and something will trigger. Now, of course, these don't exist yet, so let's fill these in. Now to fill these in, let's head down to our factory section in here. And here we can see this is the code that made the inbox button run. Here's the configuration. We're going to want to do something very, very similar for history. The only things that are going to change for us is the image that appears here. That's going to be the system name of that UI image. The text that appears on the button, the title, and the button itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy in some code. Whoops. I'm going to replace this whole section actually, and I'll just show you the refactoring that we're going to do. Because they're so similar, I'm just going to extract the logic that we used to make the inbox button into its own method. And I'm just going to pass in the things that have changed here. So I'm just going to pass in the button that we want to apply the effect on, the system name, and the text. And if we do that, we can create an inbox button and a history button using the same code, just passing in the differences, the button themselves along with their parameters. So if we do that, we don't need this anymore. And we can effectively create our buttons. And then here's the action at the very bottom. This is the button that is going to actually react and do its work when that history button is tapped. So when we hit the history button there, it should appear. We'll talk about this delegate in just a second. But let's just go Command R, run this, and see if we can get a history button to show up at the top. We, of course, do not, because what we haven't done yet is we haven't actually added our history button to the view or done the layout. So let's do that now. Let's go into the layout of this header. And just like how we've added our greeting and inbox button here, let's add our new history button, which is already configured and set up. And let's go ahead and add some auto layout for that. Let's just go to the end of the index here, the inbox button, sorry. And let's go ahead and add our history layout. And let's just review what's going on here. So history button, we want it to come on the leading side here, right after the inbox button. So we're going to add a constraint equal to system spacing after inbox button trailing anchor. So that'll set up that constraint right there. Then we're going to center it on the Y, just so it floats in the middle, and basically just follow the same pattern we did for the inbox here. We'll give it a width also of about 0.25, the entire width of the view here. And with that, that should more or less lay it out. Let's see what happens now if we go Command R and run that. Great. Okay, there we go. We've got a history button. It doesn't do anything yet, but we've added it to the view. Now we're ready to set up the protocol delegate on this button for the history view. Command 0 to bring us back our submenu here. Let's go to our home header view, which, we're already there. That's great. At the very top, first step for protocol delegate is we need to define a protocol. So here we're going to define a home header view delegate. Don't be confused by the word delegate in the name of the protocol. That was a bit weird to me at first, but that's just the pattern, protocol delegate forms. We have a protocol. This is kind of a convention just to put the word delegate at the end. And this is our home header view delegate. It extends any object. And this is the function that we're saying, if you want to implement this protocol, this is the function you have to implement. Did tap history button, because that's what we're going to call telling you that someone did tap the history button. Also note, technically we don't need to send the sender who triggered the protocol action itself. This is just kind of a convention you will see used on projects and in UIKit. Quite often you'll also send along the sender of who triggered the protocol. We didn't have to do that. We could have left that blank, but I'm just trying to follow the best practice of sending sender along here. That's why we're also passing back ourselves the home header view. Okay, so with that defined now, we are ready to create a variable that people can register themselves to basically get called when our delegate fires. So we do that with this property here, a weak var delegate of type home header view delegate. So basically we're saying this is an instance of this protocol here. And if you want to be notified when something happens, pass yourself in as the delegate here. And if you implement that protocol, we'll let you know. That's kind of how it works. Really important here, weak var. As mentioned earlier, we don't want retain cycles by having our view controller have a strong grip on its header view, which it does. We don't want the header view to have a strong retain cycle back to the view controller, because if one of those goes away and the other guy's still got a strong grip on him, we can get into something called a retain cycle. And we want to avoid that. That's why we make that a weak var. So once we've got that defined, now we're ready to actually use it down here when someone hits that button. So this is the target action on the history button. When someone clicks this, this is going to fire, and this is where we notify whoever's registered as the delegate did tap history button, passing in ourself. That's all there is to it from the view's point of view. At this point, the view is configured, it's hooked up, anyone who registers themselves is going to be notified, and that's what we're going to go ahead and do right now. The class that's interested in knowing when this subview was clicked is our home view controller. So let's go up there to our home view controller and let's implement that protocol just like we did here. Now look at this. See, protocols are used all over in UIKit. We implemented the protocol here on the UI scroll view delegate. Now we're just doing the same thing here on our own home header view delegate. So basically the way you implement and indicate I implement this protocol, in other words, you can trust me to support this interface, is through an extension, you go extend the protocol delegate you want to implement, in this case view delegate, and you have to implement that function. If we didn't have that there, Swift is pretty nice. It'll actually tell us and say, hey, you do not actually conform to this delegate. Would you like me to stub this in for you? And we could say yes. And it basically says, here's what you need to do in order to implement and support this protocol. Of course, we already have the code here that does that. And what we're going to do when that history button is tapped is we're going to create, in this case, a navigation controller. We're going to put our history view controller in it and present it. We could have just presented and put the history view controller right in here. That would have been more of a full screen takeover. But I wanted to put it in a nav controller so I get this nice little heading at the top that says the word history, but you can do either. Now we're almost ready, but if we were to run this now, it wouldn't work. We wouldn't present because we haven't registered ourselves as the home view controller for this delegate. So let's do that now. Let's scroll back up to style, where we basically set up and do a lot of our things. And this is probably one of the most common errors when using protocol delegate. People forget to register themselves. Huge source of problems, especially with UI table views. Why isn't my table view presenting data or reacting to my presses? It's often because you forgot to register yourself as either the delegate or the data source. So in our case here, with our header view, we're going to access that weak var delegate, register ourselves, and at this point, we should now be hooked up and we should be notified when that calls. All right, let's hit the fire button and give this a test drive. Gonna go Command R, let's run the app. Let's click our history button and hey, there we go. We've triggered it. We're now presenting our history view controller in our app and we hooked it up via a protocol delegate here on the history button. Good stuff. Okay, before we wrap up, I just want to comment on protocol delegate and its uses. This is just one way that we can communicate in UIKit in terms of communicating from subviews to parents. We could have also used closures, and some would say that's a more modern way of doing it, and you're absolutely free to use closures and blocks as means of communicating from subviews back up to parents. That's totally cool. I still like the protocol delegate pattern because it's so simple, it's so direct, it's almost like muscle memory for me, and it's really used all over in UIKit, and it's very consistent with how you see a lot of table views, scroll views, and other places that use it throughout the ecosystem. So you don't have to use it. I still really like it, but I think it's a really important tool for you to have in your toolkit. So if you need to implement this yourself or you come across it in a project, you won't be left out in the dark. Okay, that's it for this segment. We've hooked up a history view controller. Come back next time and we'll see where else we go in the Starbucks application. Okay, thank you so much for coming, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.